So, you've picked up Nebulous Fleet Command, you've played the tutorials, you've been overwhelmed by the fleet editor, and you're wondering what to do next. Well, you're in the right place. Here, I've got some useful tips for the basics of Nebulous that the game doesn't quite tell you that should help you out. No fluff, just the stuff that you need to know. Alright, speaking of basics, let's begin with getting around the battle space. As soon as the game starts, your ships will be dead in space and facing rear onto the combat zone. This is because they've performed a deacceleration burn from cruising speed to stopping at the edge of the battle space to begin combat. And just like you will find on an actual spaceship, the most thrust comes from your main engine, which will be at the rear of your ship. So you're going to find that ships in your fleet will start out with sluggish acceleration as they use their less powerful thrusters to start moving in the direction of travel and turning to bring their rear engines to the correct bearing. For small ships like corvettes and shuttles, this isn't a big deal, but your bigger ships need to get their large engines pointed in the right direction to get the most thrust behind them. Now, at the start of the game, after the initial burn-in, this isn't too much of a problem. You have plenty of time to get your ships oriented before you're under fire. But when you're in combat, think very carefully about the movement commands that you're given, because when you tell your ship to turn, it's got to get those engines in the right direction before it can really thrust away. As you can see here, the Rains frigate is taking much less time to turn on bearing than the larger ships in the formation with it. When you do need to move quickly, use Shift M for cruise commands instead of the regular move with waypoints. This can be much faster when you have a lot of movement commands to give at once, and will get your ship pointed and moving in the right direction fast. A cruise command will get your ship to turn and point in the direction of travel ASAP, and it will continue to travel in that direction until a new movement command is given, instead of stopping when it hits a waypoint. You can come back and fine-tune your commands once everybody is moving. Just make sure to give the movement command from the perspective of the ship, or you'll end up ordering it in the totally wrong direction. The other time to give a cruise command is when your vessel is under fire and you need to get out of dodge quickly. A lot of guns with travel time will miss a ship that moves that was previously not moving. Make sure to give the cruise command in the direction the ship is already facing, and it will instantly thrust forward with maximum acceleration and potentially make some shots hit. Just be very careful about giving a cruise command in a direction other than the one the ship is currently facing, because it will need to turn before it can burn its main engines. You can then use the cruise command to either position your ship so that it will be moved into cover, or by using successive cruise commands to help jink fire with a smaller ship that can turn a little bit sharper than a larger one. Speaking of, when you have a smaller ship trying to cap a point under fire or dogfighting with another small enemy ship, use the orbit command to add a lot of angular movement to your ship's course. This will make it much harder for the ship you are orbiting's turrets to track you, and more of their shots will miss. Any targets firing at you from further away will not have this much of a penalty, but in a one-on-one situation it can give you that little bit extra edge you need to last a little bit longer. Missiles fired at short range against an orbiting target are also more likely to miss, and rockets can't track. The flank speed command will increase your maximum speed to 150% of your standard full speed on the ship, but will intermittently damage your thrusters. Some ships, like the Sprinter Corvette, have built-in hull modifiers to offset this damage, and you can also install modules to reduce this. Some engines will also increase this chance of damage, and even though you can tank it with enough damage control teams, it's not a good idea to flank for an entire battle. For one thing, if you have thrusters taking damage from flank speed, your damage control teams will be tied up fixing that damage rather than being free to react to real threats. Use flank speed for closing, running, and rushing objectives, but I recommend building your ships around using full speed in combat. If you let your ships rest when they reach their locations, your DTC teams can top up the thrusters to full health and then be free when you move out into combat. Speaking of thrust and speed, telling a ship to stop, reverse, or turn sharply while using flank speed or just moving at high speed is a disaster. Your ship will attempt to completely arrest its momentum, stopping in space for some time and making it an easy target, and also likely presenting a broadside angle to the enemy. Try and keep your turns for a large ship sweeping rather than sharp. If you need to make a dramatic course change, do it in cover rather than in the open. You can't turn a battleship on a dime. If you think that you're not going to be in a position where you can turn your ships quickly, if you need to move in and out of cover, Think carefully when fitting the engines on your ships, as some of them will help you deal with this rather than needing to turn. Formations are a fantastic tool to reduce the amount of micro you need to keep track of, especially early on in a game. If you select the leading ship in a formation and hold down shift when giving commands, those commands will follow through to all of the other ships. This includes weapon attacks, jamming, missile strikes, etc. When placing your ships into a formation, whether that's back in the ship editor or during combat, you want to keep aware of the 3 different formation options: relative, true, and loose. Relative is the default and tries to keep the fleet in the position that you've set relative to the heading of the lead ship. This can be useful if you've got a number of ships in formation and you need to avoid them hitting each other as the formation moves. At the same time though, it's slow, and the whole formation will slow down to let other ships keep position. True essentially locks the positions of the ships in place, and the ships will attempt to swing around the guide ship or the main ship in the formation to preserve those positions while moving. This means that some ships could cross over each other or around each other during movement, which could potentially cause problems for line of fire. However, if you're setting your ships up in a gun line, or you want them all facing the same direction to fire, this is probably the best formation to use once you're in position. Finally, loose keeps the ships in formation like relative, but allows each ship to move at its own pace. This can be good especially when a formation comes under fire, as it allows your ships to get away faster or reposition faster. At the same time, I'm sure you've all seen what happens to the weak gazelle when it falls out of the herd. When you're approaching a capture point, or an area you think you're going to be fighting in, take a careful look at the sightlines to that point. You want to position your ships in the spot that lets you see the most while exposing them as little as possible. Ships are fragile creatures, and if you charge out into the open and expose your hull to everyone, you're going to find out quickly just how fragile they are. Even for ships like heavy cruisers, hanging out near a rock and using it to break line of sight while engaging can extend their lifespan by a huge amount. Being able to retreat around the curve of a large rock can give you the time you need to make that crucial repair, cool down your beam weapon, reload your broadsiders, or prepare that missile strike. Combat in Nebulous is pretty relentless, and giving yourself options by approaching an engagement intelligently rather than burning straight in can make all the difference. This can be a pretty hard concept to really discuss in a short video like this, so I may do a video in the future pointing out some good spots to put ships on the main maps for the game. Let me know if that's something you'll be interested in. Another way to make sure that your ships survive longer is to use the heading command. Heading commands can be set to a reference point in space or to a specific target, like the ship that's shooting you. With your ship selected, either right-click, go into the Move tab and press HDG, or press Alt-H and then set your heading in the desired direction. If you do this in the sensor view, you'll be able to see a dotted line between the center of your selected ship and any center contacts. Then this will help you orient your ship relative to a capture point or fleet contacts that you're struggling to keep sight of. Alternatively, you can just right-click on an enemy ship and use the UI menu to set the heading specifically to the ship you're right-clicking on. When you do this, you should see the heading option is outlined in yellow and reads as Face Track in the center of the menu. For lots of ships, especially Shelter Alliance Navy vessels, facing forward to your target like this puts their best armor, their biggest guns, and all of their angling right in the path of incoming fire. You will lose your forward thrusters and modules at the front of the ship, but you'll also protect your generator, engines, and other crucial components at the back of your ship. Now that we've covered getting around and some defensive flying, let's get a bit deeper into staying alive. If your ships are traveling around the map and this yellow icon appears above their health bar when they're selected, or this little green icon lights up in the status bar to the left of the screen, it means the enemy has a radar track on your ship. A radar track is any form of detection using radar equipment of a ship in the battle space. You see them all the time when you're playing as red boxes with a question mark and a track number next to them. If the enemy has a radar track on your ship, assume they know exactly where you are, what you are, and where you are going. This may not be the exact case, but it's better to be overcautious. If the yellow icon switches to a red crosshair at any point, this means the enemy now has a radar lock on you, and incoming fire will likely be arriving shortly. Even if they don't have a lock, your enemy might open fire despite the potential inaccuracy, and any number of munitions or missiles could be inbound if they have a track. When the enemy have a track on you, and you don't have a reciprocal track on them, i.e. you can't see any enemies but you can see they have a track on you, it usually means they are using a long-range radar solution to find you. Have a look at your sight lines. Where could that long-range radar be? It needs direct line of sight to find your ship. If you can put something like an asteroid between you and them, it'll break the track. Not taking action and continuing on like nothing is happening in this kind of situation can lead to really nasty ambushes. You can also attempt to turn off your own radar and radio communications to try and reduce your radar signature if this is happening. As long as your radio is set to receive, other ships on your side, allied as well as your own, will transmit their radar picture to you. Don't leave your radar off forever, but it could help. A really important note, you don't need your radar on to be able to detect if you are being tracked or not. If you turn off your radar and they still have a track on you, I would just turn it back on again straight away. Of course, the best way to avoid being ambushed is to set up the ambush yourself, and each faction has the tools to make that happen. For the OSP, it's a combination of the R400 Bloodhound long-range radar and the R550 early warning radar. The R550 gives you a wide picture of a lot of the battle space from a long distance, but without a lot of accuracy, and the R400 gives you a narrower picture of a specific area with a pretty good idea of where things are exactly. For the ANS, they have a very special module, the ES-22 Pinard Electronic Support Module. This is a pretty special piece of equipment because it is passive. There's no way for the enemy to know that you're using it or detecting them with it. If you've ever played High Fleet or seen my High Fleet playthroughs, you know exactly what this type of detector is used for. You can use it to track and hunt enemy fleets that have their radar turned on without letting them detect you. The Pinard can detect enemy radar emissions at any range without providing any return to the enemy at all. One Pinard gives you the direction of the emissions from the ship with the Pinard. Two Pinards gives you a basic cross-section between two different lines, and three Pinards will give you a triangulation of the enemy's location. The only way to avoid being detected by a Pinard is to turn off all the radars on your ships. Now, nobody I know of plays Nebulous Radar off, but I have experimented with myself. It's pretty fun, but it's very different. Very important note, Elint cannot detect fire control radars on PD turrets or illuminators, so don't worry about your PD giving you away. Something to bear in mind as well is that nobody is ever going to complain about you bringing any of these tools along in your fleet. The more sensors your fleet has, the happier your teammates are going to be. Now let's say you've taken my advice and you've gotten yourself into a fight and you haven't died to unseen threats on the way. You now need to look after your ships and keep them alive. When it comes to a gun battle, you already have some tips to take advantage of. Use cover and line of sight to limit how many enemies can fire at you. If you have a small fast ship, use the orbit command to swing around the enemy and make an escape rather than turning on the spot. And if they have a beam weapon, do not get within 6 kilometers of that weapon. But what about missiles? Well, missiles are an expansive rabbit hole of a concept, so I'm going to keep it simple. There are two ways to deal with missiles. You can destroy them, which is called hard killing them, and you can spoof them, which is called soft killing. If the concept sounds strange, think of any movie or game where a fighter jet has launched flares and chaff to confuse an incoming missile. If the missile doesn't hit the plane, that's a soft kill. If you have it on your ship, crew will launch chaff automatically against incoming missiles. You don't have to rely on them to do this. If you press Ctrl-Z on your keyboard, you will manually launch one chaff missile every time you press the button. So be careful if you keep pressing it because you'll just launch your whole magazine. You can also manually launch active decoys by selecting them from the electronic warfare menu on a ship carrying them and picking a direction to launch them in. Be advised that active decoys are ANS only, they're very powerful, and they're moving to become a size 2 missile instead of a size 1 missile with the carrier update. Flares are also available, and they seduce or trick wake-homing missiles, which aren't that common. I tend not to bother with flares that much. There's a very useful module called the Scryer Missile ID system. This is available for both factions. And when you have it equipped to a ship, if you have that ship selected, it will show you what seeking warheads incoming missiles have. They're also color-coded, which means rather than needing to learn the abbreviations, you can just learn the colors. For example, command-controlled missiles are shown as yellow with this system selected. If you use a comms jammer on a command-controlled missile, it will soft-kill them very easily. These missiles are controlled by radio, and your comms jammer blocks the radio. You can also use the Interrupt Disco Ball module, and there's a new one coming for OSP as well. The Disco Ball is ANS only, although settlers can use it, to give your ships an area effect protection bubble of comms, or command jamming. It's a pretty useful module to have on at least one of the ships in your fleet. If the missile is using an active radar seeker, which will show as green, then launch chaff. Act Seekers are cheap, common, and easily defeated, but they're also easy to spam. Now there is a seeker called ARAD, which is looking for your ship to be radiating radiation. That's a bit of a redundant way of saying it. It's basically looking for your radar. So if you see an ARAD seeker coming for you, turn off your radar. There's an MCOM button in the right click menu that will instantly make your ship go dark. It won't go blind if there's any allies nearby because they will radio their radar picture to the ship, but it means your ship will disappear from the radar net. Now, make sure to turn your radar back home when the missiles miss, and be warned that they may have an additional seeking warhead that may also still seek you out. So do your other things like launch chaff, attempt to comms jam them, etc. from there. If they have EO, which is blue, there's only one way to soft kill it. You need a laser dazzler. There's basically one job the laser dazzler does, and that's dazzle EO missiles, and the only thing that can soft kill EO missiles is a laser dazzler. If you don't have it, you're going to have to shoot them down if they have a lock on you. The EO warhead is Alliance only, so you don't need to worry about laser dazzlers if you're piloting an Alliance fleet, but if you're running OSP, consider having a laser dazzler in there somewhere. The EO Seeker is very expensive, but very, very good. As I mentioned, better players will be using a combination of these Seekers to get you, so you might need to mix and match your soft kill. But the more missiles you can soft kill, the easier it is for your point defense to hard kill and shoot down the rest. It's kind of a weird tug of war between soft kill options and hard kill options, and unfortunately, this is a part of the game you really need to get your head around in order to succeed. When in doubt, launch chaff, try and comms jam, and also move your ships out of the way. Some missiles turn very slowly because they're cheap, and you can dodge them just by moving. You can also jam any act or active radar missiles that are coming at you, as well as jamming the ship that could be illuminating you with a radar. But be warned that home on jam is a very common secondary seeker warhead for a lot of missiles, so when you turn on your jammer to jam the missiles, you're also now guiding them in towards you. It's a little bit of a sort of lose-lose situation with those type of missiles. The kind of toss-up for that is that adding in these extra seeker warheads does increase the price of the missiles, so your opponent is paying more points in order to try and defeat your soft kill. In which case, you've got to hope you spend enough money on hard kill to then beat their extra point investment. And it's this kind of power battle back and forth. One really cool thing is with the carrier update, we're probably going to see combat air patrols of fighters and skiffs being able to also lend a hand to shooting down incoming missiles, and it may rebalance things a little bit or change the field a lot in how these missiles interact with each other, and I'm really looking forward to that change. I've mentioned jamming a few times in the last couple of minutes, so let's just talk about jamming as a topic for a second. How does radar jamming work in Nebulous? Radar jamming works by broadcasting powerful radio signals that overwhelm enemy radar systems, similar to how loud noise can drown out someone's voice. Each jammer creates essentially a zone of confusion that makes it harder for a radar to spot anything inside that area. While you can use multiple jammers to increase the size or the power of that area, they do give diminishing returns. So the first jammer does most of the work, the next one adds about 88% more effectiveness, and then each additional jammer helps less and less until they barely make a difference after 6 or 7. Your best case is probably to use 1 or 2 jammers. Don't rely on them completely because your opponents will have ways to get past the jammers, I'll talk about that in a second, but they're not worthless and they are very, very useful. Now at some point you are going to get jammed, and it will be very frustrating the first couple of times it happens because you don't know what to do. The enemy disappear off your screen, you get all these crazy tracks everywhere. It can be overwhelming. The thing to bear in mind when you're getting jammed is that the jamming signal or the zone of confusion is being projected in a cone from the ship that is jamming you. All you need to do to defeat this jamming is get out of the zone of confusion. So if you have multiple ships, spread them out in different directions, and one of them will leave the cone and radio the position of the enemy ship or ships that are jamming you to the rest of your fleet or your allies, and you can shoot at them again. Some radars allow you to burn through the jamming. This can be effective, but it doesn't sometimes give you a very powerful track. It can be a useful additional tool. There's a BRN button at the top of the menu when you right click that lets you burn through. Quite often this just gives you a rough position of the ship so that you can take one of the other things that I'm mentioning as an action to defeat the jamming rather than just relying on that. I wouldn't shoot at these if they're purple. That just means it's a very rough position. One of the easiest things you can do is actually just approach the ship that's jamming you, because as you get closer, the radar signals become powerful enough again that they overpower the jamming zone of confusion. Basically, just spread out and close with the enemy. Those are the best two ways to deal with them. The other thing you can do is, if you want to isolate an enemy, and you don't want them to radio position, etc., jam them and then comms jam them, which means that not only will they be jammed, but they also won't be receiving any communications from their allies, which means they won't get the positions of your ships from them as a radio message, which is actually a very powerful way to isolate a ship. Watch out for getting jammed and comms jammed, but that's a lot of power. It doesn't happen too often. Another absolutely essential tool is point defense. You have to pay your point defense tax. There are players out there who play without point defense. You, if you're new to the game, should not do this. Always equip point defense if you've got the slots for it. Quite often, you'll find that high-level players will fire scouting missiles at the start of the game. These are long-range, slow-moving cruise missiles that will last a long time, and their job is to fly around the backside of the map and identify the positions of enemy ships. They do this two ways. One, if your ship detects them coming nearby, they will automatically fire on them and launch chaff, which reveals your position. Or two, if you hook your camera to the missile, it will actually reveal ships if it flies close to them. There's nothing you can do about this, but you can stop your ships firing their PD and chaff at these missiles at the start of the game. In order to do that, on the ship command menu, change the PD zone order from to point from area. This means that they will only defend against missiles coming directly at them and won't lend their point defense weapons to aid their allies. Just make sure to switch this back when you get into combat, but for the early game when you're just positioning, you're more than safe to set it to point for the first couple of seconds of the game to avoid shooting at those scouting missiles so you don't reveal your ships, and most importantly, your ships don't launch chaff, because chaff has a really high radar signature and it will show the enemy exactly where your ships are, or at least where they were when they launched the chaff. You just don't want that to happen. Knowledge is key in this game, and positioning is massively important, so giving yourself away this easily is actually really, really bad. Don't do it. If you have a long-range PD weapon like a Sarissa, then fire away at these missiles as they come in, because the enemy won't know where the Sarissa shots are coming from. They'll be too far out to notice where they fired them from. That's totally fine, and can be a very effective way to shut down the scouting. When it comes to actual point defense weapons, in general, Defenders and Pavis are the best sort of standard point defense weapon to take. It is useful to take some flak weapons. The Stonewall is exceptional. Don't go crazy on flak. It's best for dealing with clustered groups of missiles, which generally the ANS are defending against the OSP for, like rockets and things like that. Auroras are amazing. Grazers are okay. And I honestly don't know how good things are going to be in the next update, but I feel like it's going to be kind of the same thing. Smaller ships, give them a Defender or Pavis at least. It can do a lot of work just having one of those guns. A couple of final notes on the main combat part of the game before we have a quick look at some ship building basics and then we wrap the video up. Ship status. Let's say you're in a fight and you get some good hits on an enemy warship and it stops moving and it stops firing. How do you know if it's dead? Just because a ship has stopped fighting, don't assume that it has died. The most obvious sign that a ship is actually dead is if it explodes, or it starts launching escape pods. If neither of those has happened, do not assume that it's out of action. Especially with larger ships, damage control teams can work heroically to get them back online and fighting again. In fact, it's one of the most satisfying and thrilling parts of a game of Nebulous when your heavy cruiser or your liner comes back to life and starts shooting the enemy from behind. So check for clouds of atmosphere around the wreck, or as I like to call them, space oil slicks. What color are its bridge lights? If they are red, then the ship is under emergency power, and either the CIC or the engines and reactor are currently offline. They could be fixed. If you hear alarms for abandoned ship, and with the camera close to the enemy ship, that is another sign that the ship is dead. If its bridge lights are completely off, it is also completely dead. Don't forget that if you are certain a ship is dead, with one of your ships selected, right-click on the radar track for that ship and select Signal and then KIL to mark that ship as killed. It'll show up as a gray track for everyone on your team and they won't shoot it anymore. But be careful doing this and only do it for ships you are certain are dead, because if a dead ship starts shooting and it is a gray track, people won't notice. It can be really bad. Even though Nebulous is a game about large fleets of ships brawling over asteroids and rocks, the main game mode played in multiplayer is point control. So capping is actually a very, very important part of the game and of fleet building. Once a game is going, you may find that you are needed to cap a point. And if there's another enemy ship in the cap bubble, it will contest the cap unless you destroy it. So watch out for sneaky shuttles and corvettes hiding among dead ships or docked on the underside of asteroids on the edge of cap points, stopping you grabbing them. That said, if your ship has a functional primary weapon or a functional weapon of any kind, like a single missile, and theirs doesn't, it can't contest the cap point with you. If, however, you leave the cap point where the enemy vessel is still alive, it will begin capping it once your vessel leaves the area, even if it doesn't have a weapon. One of the things I'm going to start doing, and I really recommend that you do this, is if you're not bringing a cap fleet into a game, try and include 1 or 2 ships whose dedicated role is capping into your fleets. It doesn't need to be a huge point investment, but the amount of relief it will A, give whoever is actually playing cap to know that there are other cappers in, and B, if everyone brings cappers, it's actually going to make the game much easier for all of you. So I'm encouraging everyone on my Discord to do it. I encourage you to do it as well. Your teammates will be really happy with you if you bring a couple of cappers along with your Axford or your Acellos or your liners, even though you might want to play that dedicated role, because at the end of the game that could win it for you and your team. So what we've just gone over is essentially everything that I've picked up over my 2 or so years of playing the game, from people talking on Discord, from guides I've seen online, from videos, from scouring the wiki, from going through deep dive posts on the official Discord, and also just talking to the high-level players that hang out in my games. I hope there's stuff in there that's useful for you. There's definitely been things in there that really took a long time for me to learn, and adapting them into my gameplay has really elevated and increased the survivability of my ships and also my enjoyment of the game. What I'm going to spend the rest of the video on is talking about a few important things in the shipbuilder that, again, the game isn't 100% great at telling you about, that should make life a little bit easier for you. There's a really important stat for shipbuilding called ship integrity. It's used to make sure that a ship has enough components and modules inside of it so that you're not building ships that are completely empty and they're kind of able to tank damage. Basically, every ship in the game has a damage reduction rating for internal modules, and it's different per hull. And this is only applied in full if you've put enough modules and compartments in the ship. There's a bar on the right hand side of the screen that shows you how your current internal fittings contribute to the ship's integrity. As you can see, the more you add in, the higher that goes until it reaches a maximum. Once it's at maximum, the full damage reduction of the ship is applied to internal modules when they take damage. If your ship is a frontline ship, I would always make sure to get this bar full before considering a ship complete. When you're building your ship and you're assigning internal modules and components to it, think about where you want the ship to be hit. Now that might seem like a really strange concept. You don't want your ship to be hit at all, but it is going to be shot at some point. And what you want to do is have an area of the ship set up to take that damage that means the ship can continue fighting for as long as possible. For most ships, especially warships from the ANS faction, that's the nose area. You see, Nebulous simulates armor penetration and armor angling very well, so shots that do penetrate will only travel so far before they explode and deal damage. So if you put non-essential but reinforced modules in these danger areas, you can keep your ship fighting for much longer than if you put something like a reactor, if you could, in an area like that. It's a bad example. The Acello is a great example of a ship that can punch way over its weight due to just how hard it is to kill when it has its nose facing an attacker. That's why the heading command is super useful. There are more reinforced compartments and modules than the obvious ones that you can see that are actually cold reinforced. For example, the Humble Auxiliary Steering module is a reinforced module and a great one to put at the front of the ship to give some extra health. The important difference between a normal component and a reinforced component is that a reinforced one needs to be brought down to 0 hit points and then be hit again to be destroyed, whereas a normal component can be destroyed from any amount of hit points if the damage is enough to bring it below 0. This means that a DC team can actually keep repairing a reinforced compartment or a reinforced component, and if they manage to get it repaired above 0 hit points and the ship takes another hit that brings it back down to 0, they can kind of keep that compartment alive in a zombie-like state and keep your ship tanking damage. You do need to be careful though, because DC teams are very vulnerable when they're repairing, and in those positions they can be killed. Something else to keep an eye on when you're mounting internal modules and components to your ships is they have diminishing returns for multiples of the same type. Most have a sweet spot for how many you want to mount, which is usually around 3, but depending on your build and what you're doing, you can go over this number if you really want to push it. Just for an example, your first ammunition elevator gives you a flat 15% reduction to all ballistic guns on your ship. But if you want to hit a 45% reduction, you need 4 ammunition elevators rather than 3 as you'd expect. And that's the diminishing returns kicking in. Also, ships are really big, especially things like liners. Damage control teams need to physically travel through your ships. You can see this if you open up the ship's damage control window during battle. If they are on one side of the ship and they need to travel to the other to repair something, it's going to take them time to travel through the ship. This can be a really big issue in large ships like the Solomon battleship or the Marauder line ship. So try to place damage control rooms near locations that they need to respond to quickly. Even if you only have 1 or 2 teams in that area, it means that you can get a fast response team there very, very quickly. One thing that might be good to look out for is having a rapid response blocker of some kind near your engines and your reactor. Because if you have a reactor overload, getting a team there ASAP can stop your ship prematurely exploding before it's actually ready to die. There's also the module, the Damage Control Center, which is an interesting compartment because it only really slightly increases team repair speed, but it increases their movement speed by 50%, which is very useful. One last important note. Pay very careful attention to where you are putting externally mounted weapons and equipment on your ships. The ship's hull can and will block turrets, radars, and emitters from doing their jobs. If your ship isn't firing, or you find it's kind of adjusting to a weird angle to use something, pay careful attention to where everything is mounted, and maybe moving that Bloodhound or moving that Blanket Jammer to another slot could fix a lot of the problems you're having with your build. That's everything I've got to go over in this video. It was originally intended to be 15 minutes long and it's kind of ballooned way past that. I really hope that you found this useful. It's been a lot of work to put together, and honestly, I didn't think I would get it out in time before the carrier update. Now, I really hope that everything I've covered in here hasn't been or isn't about to be completely invalidated by the carrier update. The idea was to release this as a new player guide to help people picking the game up or getting back into the game with carriers coming out as a reference. So my hope is that I will be able to release a video in a week or so once carriers have come out and things have calmed down and we have a better idea of what the game looks like, with maybe a few corrections and then some really interesting things about all the new spacecraft and hulls that have been added to the game. Please tell me which of these kind of topics you found the most interesting or you'd like more information on. That will help me decide what to make videos on next. For those of you who are long-time followers of the channel, I know I haven't been great at releasing videos lately. That's all going to change with this video coming out, so look forward to that soon. And if I did manage to get this out before the weekend, I will be streaming the carrier update on Twitch pretty much all weekend long. So if you don't have the game yet and you've watched this video for some reason, check us out there or try and drop in for some games. We like to keep it pretty chill. Thank you so much for watching. Have a great day. I'll catch you in the next video. Ciao for now.